All right, excellent. Today, I wanted to go over a couple things, and I did switch um, dates around a bit, so things are a little bit more spread out. Again, I'm sorry. I hope it took this time. I'm pretty sure it did, and we will see. Most everything has been graded. There's a couple things that haven't yet been graded, and I will get to those very soon. How are you guys doing on your structure with the skin? Oh, hey, Rihanna. How are you guys doing with your structure with the skin kind of thing? It looked like one person finished it, theirs, and I think we will look at that. Oh, it looks like maybe two people did. Okay, hold on just a second here. I'm trying to fix a mistake that I made, and I will hopefully fix it soon. Okay, give me just a second. I was trying to get to a tab I wanted to share with you guys, and I accidentally made it disappear somehow. Okay, there we go. All right, excellent. So I wanted to go over some of the things that uh, regarding the structure of the skin, and then I wanted to also talk about and what abstraction means, and go over that, and answer whatever questions you guys have. I'm thinking it might be good to go over the next quiz as well, if you guys are interested in that, and of course answer any questions. So the assignments that are still to be graded, there is a wire sculpture. A couple people turned in that. And then I have a few of the annotated bibliographies I've not finished grading. And then we do have a couple people have turned in their structure with skin sculpture already. And what I wanted to do is I have the discussion board where we can look at a couple of those that have been turned in so we can talk about them. Okay, all right. Let's see. So I think we'll go ahead and do all that. Is there any? Do you guys have any pressing questions that for us to talk about first before we dive into all that? Well, that's a relief. I'm glad you guys know everything. Makes my job a lot easier. All right, we are talking about. I wanted to share what a couple people have done with their structure with a skin assignment, so you guys can see images of these, and we'll talk about what makes and there's two of them. And we'll talk about the things that I'm really liking that some of them that I'm seeing. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, Rihanna and Aaron, both of you guys can see the screen, right? Let's hope so. Let's hope that that means a yes.
I can see it now. It just took a moment.
Okay.
Yeah, same here.
All right, good. All right, so this is the first one to look at. And there's a couple things that I really like about what's going on here. one of the, this is a 3D design class. And so one of the main things that, especially if your uh, specialty is 2D design, 2D work, one of the problems that people have is embracing the idea of activating volume or space around an object. And one thing I like about this is it has a stable base, and then it has some of these elements that come out here and elements that come out here. So it does a better job of activating the volume around it rather than just if this person just made a vertical tower. And it looks to me like the module that they have is a four-sided pyramid. And it looks like they've made, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those modules. Another thing that I like about this is the way that they've applied the paper, or the skin, is not the same on all of the 6 modules, and it's interesting enough that there's a couple of photos, like right, or a couple of shadows that are really interesting in the photo. So, like with this photo, you can see that there's some structure that's reflected in the shadow right here that looks like it might be there, as well as over here. And then you see on this pyramid, you have paper right here and here. So you have this paper that's hiding what's behind it, and this paper that's behind everything. Probably something similar is what I'm guessing right here. This we can see through, and here's some paper. But I like this because I think this individual is trying to balance what is visible for the with the paper, and then uh, also using the paper on the far side to kind of frame that sculptural piece. I think that is really very interesting. Another thing I like about it is how this one seems to be attached at an interesting angle. You know, rather than sharing the flat edges, this four-sided pyramid and this four-sided pyramid are attached at the edges. And I think it would be interesting to see some of that right here too. So I think that this is a fascinating approach to what's going on. And these are from the discussion assignment, so everybody can see these images. Then here's another one. This I think is really interesting. One of the things that I like about this is that the person used their structure is a couple different colors. And I think that's really fascinating. I don't really understand what this white line is right here. I'm just going to assume that it's from the background. But it looks like this person used basically riffs on a tetrahedron kind of as their principal module. And I like again how this is a tower, which I said it can be really boring. But what I like about it is you see that they've done it ways of attaching that tetrahedron and kind of playing with the tetrahedron expectation so that it doesn't feel like a simple tower where everything's stacked. It feels like a tower that's not quite corkscrewing, but is activating the space around it. I think it would be interesting for something like this to have other pieces jutting out. I like also how there's some paper here and there, and it might be interesting on this central one if there was some paper attached to it, or maybe a little bit more. I think that this is a really good first shot, but I think it would be interesting to see an additional piece of paper here, maybe, and here, maybe, if that can be worked out, and maybe something that activates it. And maybe these questions are resolved too with multiple photos. You know, you're only seeing one photo of it, but activating it with something on the sides that pull out rather than making it a tower. Now, like I said, they do that because the attachment of the tetrahedrons is irregular. So we have this one right here. The next one kind of shares a point. It looks like it's stacked point to point. Then hit this one, the base is stuck on the point. This one, it's stuck at a different angle. But do you see what I'm seeing? That they're stuck at different angles going up the tower, and that is so much more interesting than if they're just stacked like somebody's playing with Lego blocks. So, what do you guys think about this one in relationship to what we've done? And I think we can. I'm looking at. I don't know if you guys would like to respond with going through using a couple of the steps of the tools of artistic critique. If you want to describe it, that's fine, but I'm looking for maybe analyzing and evaluating mostly. And then you can guess at the others. So who would like to talk about this one right here?
Go.
Okay.
I can go for it.
All right.
So one of the first things I noticed about this piece is that the paper is not framed on all sides, which I thought was an interesting touch. I think that it almost leaves. Sorry.
You're talking
kind of,
about like along this edge and
yes.
this edge and this edge right here.
Yeah. It's not fully framed like the other one was in a pyramid. And that opening kind of makes it seem like the paper could almost fall out like sand.
Okay, hold on. Oh, wait a sec. I'm sorry, my computer screwed up. It was messing around with the recording. Okay, I think we're good. I'm sorry, Brittany. What were you saying about?
With it not being framed on all the sides, it kind of makes me think that we're meant to assume that it's. I'm trying to think of a good way to say it. Like, it almost reminds me of time turners, like the sand hourglass.
Oh,
The
okay.
hourglass. That the paper is not stuck in position, but it creates almost a motion of where my eye goes because it isn't enclosed. Does that make sense?
I think so. It doesn't have that inherent stability that a frame on all three sides would give it. And so there's an expectation of instability. And because of the triangular forms, it's a natural connection to like an hourglass. Like that's really a good observation. I like that. Excellent. Anybody else? Hey, Polly. And Polly, what we're looking at is just like comments regarding analyzing this piece and maybe evaluating it a little bit.
Hello. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And we're just looking for like a couple sentences. And Brittany just spoke a little bit about how what she felt about her observations on how the paper is not completely framed on all three sides, which I thought was interesting. So anybody else want to make any comments about this? I think the construction is really interesting. One thing that I kind of like is how it's red down here. There's a couple orange sticks here and there's some yellow up here. I kind of like that where it's not all the same color. I think that's really kind of interesting too. So if nobody has another comment about this, I'm going to go back to the other one. And I'd like somebody to make a comment about this one. I particularly like the shadow, whoever did this and lit it the way they did, I particularly like the shadows. I think that this is one of the reasons I'm so happy when you guys take really nice photos and control the lighting. There's some cool stuff that goes on with the shadows that I think adds to just the interest of the work itself. Anybody want to make an analyzing comment or an evaluating comment about this? And I'm saying anyone to kind of frame the demand in something that you can assume is an invitation, but I will need will need one comment made on this before we can go on.
I'd like to say it looks
Okay.
like it made it to balance. Like it looks like the right side would be very too heavy, and it would have tipped over if there wasn't the left piece attached, balancing it. And it's probably hard to do.
Yeah, I like that observation. What when somebody does something like that, does it still feel kind of like it's out of balance? Not
Yeah.
uncomfortably so, but energetically or something? Does it make you want to look at it a little bit more?
Mm-hmm.
Makes it interesting. Yeah, I like that kind of use of informal balance when if this left side was any smaller, it looks to me like this whole thing would fall over to the right. Or if this was any bigger, it would fall over to the right. I like that's a really good observation, Polly. I like that because it gives just enough tension where you're not like anxious about it so much as it does engage your attention. And I think that that's really fascinating. So yeah, very good observation. So those are the only two that were turned in, and so next week we'll have more to look at. And we did go over uh, a quiz about armature and stuff like that um, last week, and I wanted to go over this quiz, this next quiz. It's carve biomorphic abstraction quiz because I want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll kind of come back to this next week when we look more at the structure with skin, and then the following week is when we're going to be opening up to really working on the carved biomorphic abstraction. I do want to warn you now that carving styrofoam sucks if you have OCD. Not the carving itself, but cleaning up. Cleaning up sucks. I would recommend finding a space that nobody cares, like in the backyard, in a garage, somewhere where you're going to make a mess and nobody really cares, because what's going to happen is you're going to get little flakes of purple dust, and static electricity will make it clean to pretty much everything. So do not wear Sunday go to meeting church clothes. Don't wear black or corduroy. In fact, I would go to like Ace Hardware or Deseret Industries and get like a full bodysuit used coveralls or something, because then you can take it off, pull it inside out, have everything just stuck to it, and go to some random coin laundry to have it washed to deal with that foam problem. And I'm just saying it can be a nightmare. So be careful. Okay. Brianna's having connection. Have you guys have any issues with the internet today? Because this afternoon, mine has been really wonky, and Rihanna just had to take off for a sec. She's going to try to get back in for the same kind of reasons. So hope this is all being recorded. It looks like the recording is still going, but for a bit, my internet was kind of wonky just a few minutes ago. Okay, Rihanna, you were able to make it back. Excellent. So if for any reason you need to take off and then re-enter, go ahead and do that. So, but I wanted to share a couple things really briefly about the biomorphic abstraction carving, and just to get you guys thinking about it a little bit. And I want to talk about abstract. We've already explored, like for the sculptural photos, sculptural photography, everybody was making a pretty much realistic dwelling house kind of thing, and some of them were really, really cool. And all of you guys did way better. The first semester I taught this, I had some really very low expenditure of mental calories caliber uh, attempts. I mean, very, very sad. and none of you guys did anything close to that awful this semester. So thank you guys, everybody in the class, for not completely sucking. That's a real 2 thumbs up from me. And then the second one, the wire one, that we're starting to get into kind of abstracting 3D scribbles, but everybody's still doing something that is very much anchored in the real world. Now for this one, we're kind of doing non-objective geometric shapes. And I wanted, and then the next one, the biomorphic abstraction, we're going to be doing full-blown organic abstractions. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. My grandpa was the kind of guy that thought that art was only art if you could see it out a window. And it's an interesting perspective, and some people believe that, and that's fine. But that is not the totality of art. So we're gonna talk about this page in just a second. How many of you, and you could do the little emoji hand raising if you've heard of it before. How many of you have heard the phrase "art imitates nature"? It's really interesting to me because before about 2022, everybody heard it, and now fewer people are hearing it. And I think that's kind of sad because on one hand it's nice, but on the other hand, it kind of takes away a little bit of what I have to work with. But art imitates nature. A lot of people for a long time thought that art was just stuff where people are demonstrating a facility with visual symbols that everybody could engage with, and which means that a tree looks like a tree, a horse looks like a horse. Okay, Rihanna. Okay, her art imitates life, life imitates art. Yeah, and that's kind of a distortion of the same kind of idea. The phrase "art imitates nature" comes from actually the Republic and Phaedo and Timaeus. These are 3 things written by Plato. We go to sacred-texts.com or .org. Let me see if I can find that really quick. Okay, it's an internet sacred text archive, and I'm going to put it into the chat. Let's see if I can if I can get to the chat. Okay, here we go. All right. This is a really good website. I read a lot, and every artist should be in the habit of reading a lot, watching a lot of information, finding out about a lot of things, because it really expands your expressive vocabulary. Sacred-text.com is really good. They have everything from the Bhagavad Gita to Platonic dialogues to the writings of St. Augustine. And even I believe I saw Wassily Kandinsky's The Spirituality and Art in there, which is really good. You guys should definitely read that. But Plato said, art imitates nature. And for people like my grandpa, that meant, like I said, you have a shared visual vocabulary, which means that everybody would paint a tree that looked like a tree that everybody could recognize. And you can really see that up to about the birth of Impressionism. So a lot of art looks like looks like nature up until about the mid to late 19th century. What Plato actually said, the rest of what he said was art imitates nature, and nature is a manifestation of the divine will, which completely changes everything. So Plato is saying that whatever structure governs the universe is expressed through our understanding and observation of nature, what will we see. So if art truly imitates nature, then art should also be a manifestation of our will, And doesn't that change it quite a bit? It's no longer has to be limited to trees, but now it can be what we think about trees. You know, what we're observing, what we want to create, what we feel compelled to create. Now, art isn't. If you just make art for art's sake, I think that that's kind of a waste of time, and I'll explain that a little bit. Art really can't be art unless it's more than just you making a mark. If you are inviting something beyond yourself to help you, to collaborate with you, that's the point when it starts becoming art. And all of you have experienced that. When you have done something and you come to your senses like an hour later and your foot's asleep because you were just going on with your digital pad or your painting or whatever it is you do, that means you're tapping into something way more than just your ordinary, everyday, ego driven self. You're tapping into something beyond the immediate ego. And that's when it starts becoming art. And also, again, like I said about a month ago, that applies to absolutely every endeavor. If have you ever been jogging and gotten to the zone and you just lose all track of time and space, or been writing, same type of thing happens, driving somewhere, same kind of thing. People call it zoning out or daydreaming, and that's perfectly fine. But Malcolm Gladwell talks about it as the flow state. He describes it as the flow state, and this is when you are really attaching yourself and connecting with that something that I believe is responsible for the drive that creates art. You're building something, and you could be teaching a kindergarten class, or you could be knitting. It doesn't matter. Everything in between. But that's when art is made, and art is not just a thing. It's not just a painting or a sculpture. Art is also the action of creating. So it's not just, it's the action of creating and the evidence of that action. And that's what art is. I think it's really important to remember that, because what that means is, regardless of what medium you work with, and regardless of when you've put on your artist hat and have decided, okay, for the next 15 hours, I'm going to be an artist, when you create something that demonstrates getting into that flow state or being in that flow state, you've been building art. You're always an artist, but that's when you're creating art, right? Which I think is a really a good way to look at what you do. St. Augustine talked about the capacity, drive, willingness, or ache that we have to create is a mark that proves we are in turn created by something, by a higher order of existence. And he called it the potter's thumbprint on the soul, which I think is kind of, I like looking at it that way. Albrecht Dürer talked about art as uh, being of necessity created using four pillars. And one pillar is uh, proper materials, making sure that you're using the right materials for the thing that you're working on. If you're doing digital art, it's going to be really hard to do that with just finger paints. You have to be using the right kind of art pad and the right kind of tools. And if you're making a set of stage dressing for a community theater, it's got to be something that's not digital. It has to be applicable to what you're doing. Another thing he talked about is proper proportion. We did talk about the golden section. That's just one of about a dozen different sets of uh, very powerful ratios and proportions that we use as human beings that we just are hardwired to work with. But I think it is completely inappropriate to limit what we do to those things. We're aware of them. We need to be aware of them. But as artists, we have to step back and look at it and make sure that not only is it balanced, but it's balanced in the right way. Like that stack of the stack of tetrahedrons that we saw, that Polly mentioned on the right side was branching off, and on the left side was kind of stable. That is balanced in a very different way than if you're in a ceramics class and you throw a perfect pot. The balance is still necessary to the success of each of those things, but the balance is different. So the balance needs to be specific to whatever you're doing. The proportions need to be correct for what you're doing, not always using the golden section. Does that make sense to people? Then the third one is honesty in creation. When we do good craftsmanship, we're not expecting that you guys, when you work the first time you work with something, that you're going to be an expert with it as if you've worked with it for 20 years. You need to be honest with where you're at. If you can do a good job, you do a good job. You don't just slap something together. If you can do a great job, you do a great job. But then also, what if you are making something for a specific project that has to look finished, that you make it look finished? If you're making something for a specific project that has to look finished and you left it slapdashed, that's not going to work unless the motivation behind the art, the reason you're working on it, is to do something that's finished, but it looks slapdashed. Do you see what I'm saying? You are aware of being honest in your craftsmanship. And to be totally truthful, for the most part, most of you will never have worked with popsicle sticks, and pipe cleaners and glue and paper mache and stuff like that. So this will be, whatever you do is going to be the best thing you've ever done in your entire life using those media. So think about it from that way, and which kind of segues into discussion on perfection. Perfectionism, we use that completely incorrectly. Do you guys remember about 3 weeks ago, I said what perfection is a synonym for? What is perfection a synonym for?
Finished.
Yes, finished, exactly. It is not a synonym for making something look like space age robots constructed it using nanites, and picking at it. Because the reality is, when you are honest in your construction, whatever you've made is the very best that you have made up to that point. And when you're done with it, it is perfect. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? This is really hard because who is going to be your worst critic? You are artists, it's always going to be you. We are our own worst critics as artists because we misapply perfection all the time. That's why I want you guys to be so familiar with those 4 tools of artistic critique, so that when you complete something, you can step back, look at it, and apply those tools as if it's the first time you've ever seen it. And I guarantee the majority of times when you do that, you're going to realize that you actually are really remarkable at what you do. Something to think about. So those 3 things so far, we're talking about correct use of materials. The materials are appropriate for what you're trying to do. Talking about proper balance, making sure that not just that the thing is formal or informal balanced, or formally or informally balanced, but it hangs right for what your purpose is. Third is honesty in creation, or good craftsmanship. The fourth that Albrecht Dürer talked about was spiritus, or the breath. And that's when I was talking about a little bit earlier. If art is an imitation of nature, and nature is a manifestation of the divine will, so when we create art, it needs to do the same thing and be a manifestation of our will. And what propels it into that realm of artness is the fact that we are asking for something beyond our normal, everyday, ego-driven self to help us get into the flow state. Use our future past awareness. Use our higher being. If you are spiritual or religious, you connect with those energies. And Albrecht Dürer talked about that as adding breath to it. And the word that he used was based in Latin, called spiritus, and that's where we get the word inspiration from. Friends of mine who are professional calligraphers in Turkey, one of the things they told me they do is, well, and I have a friend who's a calligrapher in Jordan too, does the same thing. When he makes a mark, or when she makes a mark, any of these men and women that I know, they will breathe out as they're uh, painting with their pen. And that breath is a symbolic way of giving some of their life to this construction that they're making. And it's interesting to me because when people design fonts with that kind of awareness, the fonts feel very different than if they're just following an algorithm. And I know you guys have seen this kind of thing. When something is created just following an algorithm, a lot of the times it feels like it. But when somebody is making something with intent and they're putting something of themselves into it, we can usually feel that. Would you guys agree with that? Is that an observation that you've had as well?
100% yes.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Great. I love that you can see that. Because I've given this lecture to people before, and they just look at me like I'm the biggest idiot in the world, and which they don't have the right to do because they're not my mother-in-law. But when I'm really glad that you guys are professional artists and you understand what you're smelling what I'm stepping in, and I really appreciate that. So I want you to keep those things in mind because as we move forward, I want you to kind of reach into what you want to explore a little bit yourself and kind of pull that out and enjoy a little bit of what you're doing. Take into consideration that when you create, apply your best craftsmanship skills, because craft is not a dirty word. The separation of craft and art happened about the same time as the statement, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What is wrong with that statement? It is intrinsically wrong. But do you guys know what the fallacy of that statement is? If Brittany looks at something and if Polly looks at the same thing, Brittany likes it, thinks it's beautiful, Polly doesn't. If beauty truly lies in the beholder, then that thing is changing for Brittany and Polly. But it's not. It's the same thing. The thing that's different is your perspective. When Shakespeare said a rose is a rose and would smell as sweet by any other name, and I'm butchering the quote completely, what he's saying is that the rose remains the same whether or not you recognize that it smells like a rose. Have you ever had the experience where you've looked at something or read a book or watched a movie that you thought really sucked, and then a couple years later you come back to it and you think, oh, that really wasn't as bad as I expected? Or maybe a year or two after that you go back to it and say, I like that. Polly, have you?
Yes.
Yeah. What was your experience?
Especially, well, the first thing comes to mind is the sense of humor. Something that I thought was just so like not clever and I wouldn't even laugh. Then like a few years later, I laugh very hard. I don't, and maybe it's a little bit different, but I
No,
think
that's exactly what I'm talking about. Because the thing didn't change itself at all, did it?
yes, it's my experiences, my
Yeah,
life.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that's really important for us to know. That the beauty is there in whatever the thing is, or the ugliness, the good and the bad is already there. But what makes it come out in our relationship to it is dependent on us and the vocabulary that we use when we look at it. Our own personal perception. Another example do any of you know how to read Navajo or the Dene language? Um, if you have a book that's given to you that's written in Dene, you're not going to be able to read it, but it doesn't mean the book is valueless. It just means that you aren't able to read it. But somebody else who can, then the book is a repository of knowledge. The Bible's been translated into more languages than almost any other book, and that's a perfect example. It's still the same thing, even though it's been translated. Even English has been translated, like I read somewhere, like 11,000 times, something absurd. I hope that's an exaggerating an exaggeration, but it's books like that become different for everybody who reads it. But it doesn't mean that the book itself is valueless or more valued, or it has more value itself. It just means that that value changes with the perspective of the person that's approaching it, which I think is, you know, a good thing to consider. So when we look at somebody else's artwork, we can evaluate it. That is a judgment call on our part, but that's why I think it's so important to have that vocabulary, that precise vocabulary that we've been talking about, that's in that the page where I talked about the tools for artistic critique. It's important to have that precise vocabulary so that you can articulate why you feel the way you do about it. If it sucks, that's fine. If it's beautiful, that's fine. But you need to be able to approach it with the confidence of articulating why you feel that way about it. Does that make sense to everybody? I know I kind of ramble at talking about art, you know, what art is, the pillars. I think Albert Durer, that essay, when I first read it, okay, I'm going to geek out for just a sec, so you guys are really impressed. And if you're not impressed, I forgive you. But a friend of mine had a book by Albert Durer that was in German and English, and I read that essay in English and in German, and I had it side by side, and it was really fundamentally transformative for me reading that, because he wrote it, what, 400 years ago, something like that, and it was still completely impactful and true for today. And I look at vapid social media creators today, you know, content creators today, and what it frustrates me, it makes me angry that people have a forum, they have a stage to spout nonsense. They don't have the precision to articulate their own thoughts, and they express verbal diarrhea without really having any thought content behind it. And I'm not saying that everybody does this, but there are a lot of very popular uh, social media personalities that do this, where people tune into them. And I think the reason they tune into them is because somehow it fulfills a need to fill up space in their schedule. You know, it helps them to avoid thinking. And do you guys know what kinds of social media content I'm talking about? It makes me upset because we all have brains, we all have intelligence. If you push it away from you, so you refuse to acknowledge it or express it or articulate it, then it kind of fills up all that space in your head, so you're not thinking anymore. And I think that's really sad. Um, I'm very grateful. None of you guys do that. None of the people, I have not met very many people in the art program at UVU that would even come close to qualifying for this kind of vapid non-thinking, which I'm very grateful, because when you guys are creating, you are consciously, sometimes subconsciously, but most of the time you're consciously creating precision with the visual vocabulary you have access to make something intentional. And I think that that's something that we really need. Whether or not you agree with what other people do or even like what other people do, the fact that you intentionally create says an awful lot about your own capacity for thought. I'm really, really grateful for it. But the so Albert Durer talks about 4 different pillars, and I think the 5th one is important. And this is why sometimes we create things, leave them half finished, and then throw them away. The 5th one is communicate, the power of communication. Art exists to be shared. And sometimes that sharing is just with our past self that created it and our future self that looks at it. And that's all it's needed. It's needed to fulfill an exercise in the learning process. It's necessary to communicate that learning to ourselves. So sometimes, you know, it's a very tight circle of communication, but a lot of the times that communication is a really big circle where we put it out there. We put it in an exhibition or a show, and other people engage with it. And if we are successful in communicating with that broader audience, people's minds get blown. And I think can be a really beautiful thing. Anyway, that took me a little bit of a different tangent than what I was expecting. And we will go back into the introduction on the carved biomorphic abstraction later. But one thing I did want to do is share with you um, a short PowerPoint that I put together where we talk about abstraction. Do you guys see what I was talking about with the the very first assignment we did something that was very naturalistic, observations of a house. Second one, a little bit more abstract. The third one is we're working basically with shapes. Now we're going to start making biomorphic abstraction. We'll talk more about that next week, but I want to share this with you. Anybody have any questions about the dribble I've been spewing for the last half an hour? All right. Well, let's just pretend that it was very academic and very highbrow intellectual stuff, okay? And now I will go on. One thing I really appreciate, okay, thank you, Polly. One thing I really appreciate about you guys is you have dad joke figures in your own lives, so you know how to respond appropriately, so I feel validated, and I really appreciate that. Um, with the forced laughs and everything, so thank you. All right. All right,
I
please.
also have my husband to train on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Polly. And I'm certain that you are blessed with supreme stamina as well and patience. Okay, I'm trying to get this so I can share it as a slideshow, and I'm having a hard. Okay, there we go. Okay, can everybody see this? It should be a red tree. And I can't see your faces, so if somebody can say it out loud, I'd appreciate it.
I can see it.
Okay,
Can see
excellent.
it.
Excellent, excellent, great. All right, as we go through this, there's only about 6 slides, but I want to talk about each one. And I'd really appreciate it if everybody, if you have access to a microphone, please speak up and make comments about it. All right, so when we look at this, would you say that this is more naturalistic, realistic, in on that realm of things, or would you say that this is more abstract?
I would say realistic.
Yeah, you can recognize it. What is it?
An autumn tree.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's an autumn tree. The leaves are turning red. They look like they're ready to fall off. It looks to me like it is by one of the beautiful mountain lakes. If you guys drive up Provo Canyon at all, it looks to me like it could very well be a scene from there. Behind it we have the blurred out trees and everything like this, but it looks pretty naturalistic, I would say. And we look at this, would you say that this is naturalistic, realistic in that realm, or would you say it's more abstract?
I would say naturalistic.
Yeah,
More
yeah,
on the realism.
yes, absolutely. I think so, especially when we look on the left-hand side with these trees here, on the right foreground, with the short tree trunks. This is one of the paintings from the Hudson River School, which is one of my favorite. It was the first real American art movement, and I think the work is absolutely beautiful. And we look at this, the artist creates a very naturalistic, realistic scene. It's obvious these are trees. It's obvious that they're trees and a valley and a river that extends into the distance with mountains behind, clouds up in the sky. We can see buildings off on the middle background there with the looks like maybe a church almost, maybe a barn. We see closer to the foreground, center foreground, we see a figure here with a red jacket. We see some livestock. On the right of the figure with the leather jacket, we see somebody. It looks like they're pulling a boat onto the shore, but it looks
Sorry, I
like a
can
very beautiful.
only
What's
see
that?
the red tree. I can only see the fall tree still. The picture didn't change.
Yeah, I'm still on the
Oh,
autumn
the picture
tree.
didn't change. Okay, let's
Yeah,
see.
that's the issue I had where I connected and came disconnected and came back earlier.
Okay. I'm going to try to change something then. All right. This is what I'm going to do. Okay, can you guys see this image where it's the fall tree?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see a
River
larger version of the Hudson
yes.
River School? Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
I can see the river school one
Okay.
now.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you. Sorry.
All right. I do not I wonder now if all the other classes I've shared this to had the same kind of problems, but everybody was just too polite to say anything. All right, so this is still realistic, right? We can still say it's really realistic. Now, when you look at this, what kinds of things do you see? What do you recognize about this that relates to realism? And then what do you see as a difference between this uh, tree, and it's supposed to be a persimmon tree, and this Hudson River School painting? What is one of the big differences that you see?
This one uses flat color. It's
Excellent.
not.
The color is a lot more unnatural because it's more flat. Okay, great.
The overall image is a lot more flat. Like it looks like it's cut out of paper or, on paper instead of like imitating 3D like the painting.
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. This is an example of the beginnings of abstraction. Abstract is another word for simplification. Okay. And first off, if any of you saw this in a real life scenario, if I saw it, I would run screaming away because I've never seen a tree where every single leaf is flat like this. It's, and all the flowers are either in perfect profile or face on. It's not naturalistic. It's not realistic, but we can tell what it is. So the abstraction comes like with the observation that the colors are very flat. They're simple colors. They aren't shaded like in the real world. We also have very stilted, defined, and simplified silhouettes or presentations of objects that we can identify. This is from the miniature painting tradition, or the Name painting tradition out of India and Transoxiana. That's a word I want everybody to write down and remember. Transoxiana. I'm going to type that in to here. This is a big girl word that I want everybody to remember because it will make you feel very grown up when you use it. Trans means on the journey to, or in the process of, or changing. So it means on the road to, basically. Oxiana is a really old word for Europe. Uh, Occidental is another word for European. So Transoxiana means everything from Southwest China up to the Mediterranean. So it's today we talk about the Middle East, but when we use the word Transoxiana, we sound like we're really smart. So this covers Turkey, Iran, Iraq, the Arabian Peninsula, India, as well as the Balkans. Okay, but this particular painting, this style of painting, comes from that area. And you look at these birds, you can tell what they are. You can tell what they are, but it's a very simplified bird. It's not like an Audubon naturalistic, realistic bird at all. So this is where we start seeing abstraction in practice. Look at this. This is the state flag of New Hampshire. What is this green glob?
Is it an evergreen
Yeah,
tree?
it's a tree, isn't it? That's what we're looking at. This is a tree. These are trees. This is a tree. This is a tree. Would that freak you out if you actually saw it in the real world? I mean, it would be horrifying. Even though it is a tree, it is not a naturalistic tree. This is where we are really getting into abstraction. The tree has been simplified to the point where it's a flat color and it's just a silhouette. Now, with that theme going on, what can you guess that this is the kanji for?
Go way out on a limb and say tree.
Yes, Rihanna, shockingly, this is Japanese kanji for tree. And we can see what is interesting to me is we look at this tree, we can identify it. There's enough visual cues. This we can extrapolate that this looks like a silhouette of a tree. The green color helps give it away. When we go to the kanji, we can kind of extrapolate that this might be a vertical trunk. This might be the diagonal of the limbs, just like the green one earlier. And then maybe this is a horizontal, or maybe this is a suggestion of like a horizon line. So this is a tree in front of the horizon, or maybe this is an abstraction of the root ball, or the ground where the tree is coming out of, just misplaced. But it's interesting to me because this is simplified or abstracted to the point where we really are having to surmise a lot of information or attach meaning to it that isn't readily apparent. Now, when we go to this one, this is again abstraction. What do you think this is of? Continuing with our theme. What's that?
It follows with it, a tree.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually painted by a friend of mine, and it's a stand of poplar trees. So we have one here, one here, and she did it in such a way. What are the only, once you know it's a tree, what are the only things that give it away as a painting of trees? There's the vertical strokes and green, and that's it. And then the larger tree, you have a little bit of something that might be brown at the bottom for a trunk. But this is I like these slides because this progression really brings us from naturalism, realism, to we have design, we have simplification, we have real strong simplification with just a couple.
Did he freeze for anyone else?
Yeah, he's frozen.
Mid-word too.
Are you guys back with me?
Yes.
Okay.
We're here.
Yeah.
Did we
Okay.
all freeze for you?
Because for me, the screen went blank for a bit and it was beeping, telling me it was trying to reestablish the call. But if everybody's here, that's great. Abstraction is a simplification of the natural world. So this is a reference to the natural world, simplified with just strokes of color. Non-objective means that somebody is making something that's not naturalistic, that doesn't have initial reference points to the natural world. So non-objective is going to be things like where people are using symbols, like numbers, letters, font styles, or shapes. Another thing is, and non-objective may also be referencing emotions or sounds. So it still fits into that kind of abstraction world, except instead of regular abstraction, which is a simplification of things we encounter in the physical world, non-objective is an extrapolation, a visual form of things that are not encountered in the physical world. They're not objects. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, now keeping with the theme, Rihanna, what is this painting of?
The stream hasn't updated for me,
Oh, okay.
but I could see you hovering over on the side.
It's slide number 7 that we're looking at. Can everybody see slide number 7?
Yes, it looks like a ladder or a building with a window.
Yeah, it looks like a ladder. This is actually, it's called De Stijl, is the style, and it's by Piet Mondrian. And Pete Mondrian lived in an era of, I don't know if you can imagine, within his lifetime, people went from riding horses and buggies to automobiles that went over 60 miles an hour just within his one lifetime. I don't know if that is a dramatic increase of technology. You know, he lived in an area where towns transformed from people saying hi to each other on the street to being able to phone each other, you know, using telephones, where you have wires and electricity running to every home in one lifetime. And one of the things that Pete Mondrian did was try to grapple with this incredible social chaos and, you know, technological chaos with all this change by simplifying things as much as possible. Instead of diagonals, he started using vertical and horizontal lines. And instead of all the shades of color, he simplified it down to white and black and the primary colors, and sometimes green or orange. And then he would do paint landscapes of like parks and cities scapes and meadows, but instead of using all the inherent colors and diagonal lines, he would parse it down to vertical and horizontal lines and then primary and some secondary colors. So this is actually, believe it or not, a landscape. So we have a horizon line is that middle horizontal black line. We have clouds up above. We have other things going on down below that could reference people or pathways or different things. Some of the tree structures would be some of these vertical lines, but he simplified it to the point where it became so abstracted that it almost became impossible. Well, it became impossible to tell what this was without any additional information. Can all of you guys see this Mondrian painting now? Now, I've done this before and people told me I was full of crap, and so I like showing this last slide. Can everybody see this? The 6 paintings, all by the same artist, Pete Mondrian?
They're very small and in the corner, but I can see them.
Okay. Hopefully your feed will. Does anybody else has your feed updated so you can see the larger slide?
Yes, see it great.
Okay, great. These 6 paintings are all done by the same artist, Pete Mondrian. This is at the early stage of his career, and this is later on. And the thing that I want you to look at is the progression of abstraction. And I will tell you, these are all 6 paintings of the same tree. And look at what's happening here. It's, you know, this kind of expressionist a la the style of Vincent van Gogh. And you can see that there are these forms that we recognize. It's a relatively naturalistic tree in the structure. The colors are not very naturalistic, but he has a lot of that brush energy that Van Gogh did when he was really defining how we think of today of expressionism. And then this next one, Pete Mondrian is stripping away a lot of the color. He's simplifying it. But we still get a lot of these curving, expressive diagonal lines. It's still kind of bears relationship to a tree. We can still kind of see that in there, but he simplified a lot of the lines. We don't see the texture of the bark anymore. We don't see how the light hits things. We don't see very much use of any sort of reference to naturalistic color. We go over to the next one, which the top right. So Rihanna, it's going to be the top right and that little teeny tiny thing. Hopefully you'll see this portion in the video so you can get a better image of it. And I'm thinking I'm going to record this as like a short video as well that I will also put in sometime before the weekend so that everybody can see this really awesome, emotionally powerful, driven, slideshow. But this top right one, we can see that Mondrian has simplified the shapes tremendously, where they are just almost swooping lines. And there's only a couple colors. They're very neutral. very, he's still very interested in browns and neutral tones. The bottom left, it looks like it's more complicated and that there's more shapes, but how has he simplified the tree even more on that one? He's not using the diagonal or swooping curved lines anymore. They're all vertical and horizontal. They're all boxy shapes now. That middle bottom, he simplified that even more. Where, yeah, they're all simple rectangles. He's only using shades of yellow and taupe and very, very pale blue. And then the bottom right, the same tree, the only reference point that we have to see that it might be a tree is the fact that it's being shown by other paintings of the same tree. And that's it. We have we have a shade of gray, we have white, we have yellow or orange, and we have this red, and we have black, and that's it. He's taken out all the other shades of color. We can go back and look at this one. This is a really simplified version of what he was doing. But this is what I wanted to share with you about that kind of journey of abstraction, simplifying and simplifying. And this, one thing that I really love about abstraction is that it allows an opportunity for people to basically encounter what they want to see in somebody else's work. So you're not being forced into sharing a vision common with everybody around you. When you look at a tree that is naturalistic, everybody sees it as a naturalistic tree. When you look at a Pete Mondrian painting, you can see a tree only when you want to. It becomes something completely different. As an artist, you're not bound by other people's expectations. So when we go into next week, when we start looking at the biomorphic abstraction, we'll talk about it more. But I want you to be thinking about what are the organic shapes that intrigue you? What are the fascinating forms? What are the things that you like seeing? And you're going to be developing imagery around what you enjoy, simplifying the organic shapes around you. And the kinds of things that I want people to be looking at are bone structures, like knuckles, the ends of bones, scapula, different things like that. I want you to look at succulents are really good. Basically cactus plants without the spines. Look at the shapes of the fleshy leaves, those kinds of forms. I like orchid blossoms are really good too. They're beautiful shapes when they're taken out of context. They don't remind you necessarily of flowers. Orchids are not flowers; they're completely different. But to all of us normal people, they look very much like flowers. But if you have a friend who grows orchids, tell them that they're a flower, and they will slap you down really fast. We're looking at blossoms like that, blossoms type structures, but fleshy elements of plants, things that have form, and undersea things like bladders for kelp, uh, um, anemones, coral forms, things like that. They're very interesting. They're very organic, but I want you to kind of dissociate with having to communicate that this is a specific plant. It's an identifiable form, because I want you to explore the things that you enjoy about those organic structures. Personally, I like how a banana looks. I like the shape and feel of a banana, and I like succulent plants. And so it's kind of fun to work with forms that look like that feel like a fusion between the structure of banana and the structure of these desert plants like that. Knuckle bones are really cool. I love those kinds of structures, and I want to share. Excuse me, I'm trying really hard not to sneeze. I want to share a couple images from the introduction to this to kind of set the stage. The introduction to Module 4. Let's see if we can. And Rihanna, tell me if you can see this. I'm hoping you can see this.
I can see it now.
Okay. All right. Good. The carved biomorphic abstraction. Biomorphic means basically shifting organic forms. Morphic means shifting, changing, transformative. Bio means organic, living. And abstraction means we're simplifying it. We're taking it out of context. We're not showing it to be naturalistic. And for some of you, especially those of you who are um, uh, digital artists, who are illustrators, this is going to be a difficult thing to work with. And that's why I'm kind of prepping you now. I want you to look at this and think about these things. The oldest human-made sculptures have been these kind of biomorphic abstractions where they're simplified forms. I love this. This is almost 40,000 years old. If you can imagine this being 10 times older than the oldest pyramid in Egypt. This is 3.5 times older than some of the oldest structures on the planet. It looks like I'm going to blow it up a little bit. This has been called the jaguar totem or the lion totem because it looks kind of like an almost feline type shaped head on kind of a human-like form. But you can see how the artist simplified shapes. They kind of flow together. They help us to feel that there's an organic form there, but they're simplified enough that it does not look naturalistic. Some of the things that identify this for people as kind of a feline form is the shape of the ears. This almost looks like a feline type muzzle. And the proportions are similar to like a panther or a lion head. And it's on kind of an anthropomorphic body. Anthropomorphic is another one of those big girl words where it basically means human-like. And I think that that's beautiful. Some other sculptures that fit in this and are really in that same time frame are the Venus sculptures. If you look up Venus of Willendorf, there were thousands of these things made throughout Europe, and there's only like several dozen that are in museums currently, but they are these organic abstractions of what people assume is a feminine form, and I think it's a pretty valid assumption. And we can look at those more later on as well. But here's a couple of videos that talk about this particular shape, and I just think it's really fantastic. The kind of visceral connection that we have to some of these shapes. I'm going to show an image. I'm going to pull up an image of these kinds of sculptures. And there's a lot of these kinds of things. They're basically they look like votive sculptures. And I think that there's a really strong case to be made that these are sacred and spiritual in nature. So this is primarily, it's one that you recognize, that you've probably seen before. But there are a lot of variants on this that have been found. Like this is a variant, but they are these. I think we can argue that these are venerative sculptures of votary sculptures, because they are found when they're found in caves. The cave structures they are found in are very difficult to get to, and they're usually on the far side of a very narrow opening. And so I think when, if we go back to when we talked about it the first time we were together, when we think of things like extrapolation of meaning by where we find stuff, when this is found in an area that looks like it's very difficult to get to, where it looks like people have changed the shape a little bit so that they can be around it, it's on like a presentation platform kind of thing, or near a presentation platform, I think we can justify extrapolating that this perhaps has religious importance. But I love those kinds of forms because they feel like somebody is making an organic shape that has reference points to human bodies, and so they are intentionally made. And there's some sort there's a certain element of beauty to them, I think, when we see them. And you can see these Venus votaries all over the world. There's lots of different variations on them. And let me find some. Let me see if I can find some other images. Okay, yeah, here's some good ones. And I'm sharing my screen with you. Hopefully, ideally, if it works. And we look at these, they are from all around the planet. And some of them look more humanistic, some of them look less. But I like this one where it looks like to me it's a form that is wearing some sort of either a net over their hair, or their hair is braided very tight to the scalp. Maybe it has some longer braids, but you can see that this it. I think in my reading of this, we can identify this as a human form, because I can see areas where the eyes, the brow ridge, and nose, and chin. This looks to me like a neck. That's why I'm interpreting this as hair. But it's also very much abstracted, and it's organically abstracted. So this is very much a biomorphic abstraction, because we have these smooth lines. It doesn't look mechanical. Yeah, we do have these straight lines in the hair area, but overall, the shape is curving. The forms kind of blend in to each other, and it does feel like it's a reflection of organic form. This is several different variations of this kind of votary type form. And some of them this kind of looks like, I'm not going to be very respectful, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of the roasted chickens you get at Costco. But some of these, like this, I think is very beautiful. And it does feel like this another kind of abstracted representation of the divine feminine. We have these organic shapes. The head is a head by placement, not by proportion. It doesn't look very naturalistic, but we do see shoulders narrowing down to just above the waist, and then it comes out at the hips and goes down to narrow points towards the feet. I think that I think it is appropriate to read this as like a variant of the human form. Same like with this one, where we have this kind of neck blending into a very abstracted head area. We have shoulders. Maybe this is tapering to points representing something like an arm. And without knowing where these are found, I think that we could almost say justify them as being viewed as like Barbie dolls. If they are found in areas that are hard to get to, that seem to be sacred spaces, then I could see, yeah, we could justify them as being viewed as votary figurines. But if they're found in just like around the fire pit in the home, then maybe they're Barbie dolls. But these kinds of forms are what I want you to be thinking of, not necessarily reflective of the divine feminine, but organic shapes that are simplifications of what we see in the real world, but are not things that we actually see. If you met somebody that looked like any of these things for real, I mean, it would be kind of freaky. But can you see that relationship of simplification of human forms, recognizable forms, but making them abstracted to the point where you have the opportunity to overlay a lot of your own meaning onto this, or inject a lot of meaning into it without it being something that is a visual reference point that everybody immediately recognizes as like a tree or something like that. Do you guys get what I'm kind of shelling out? All right. So any questions about kind of the stuff that we've talked about today? We talked about what art is. We've talked about abstraction, where abstraction goes to. We've talked a little bit about biomorphic abstraction. We applied some of the tools of artistic critique to look at people's examples of the structure with the skin assignment. Next week, we're going to look more at more examples of structure with skin. We're going to be talking about the organic or biomorphic abstraction a little bit more. We'll go through some artists that use it, and we'll look at the quiz as well. Before we break up for tonight, anybody have any questions or observations about the stuff that we've talked about? Did anybody learn anything that kind of made you happy for tuning in? Or made you angry that you tuned in? I'll take either one.
I know that I did, but I can't remember what it was at the moment.
Do you remember about the time point? Was it like right after we started talking, or was it a little bit further on?
I think I'm just gonna have to skim the video.
Okay, all right, that's fair. One of the things that kind of separates us out. Yes, Polly.
Well, I liked when you were explaining what art is. I think there are a lot of definitions, and it's still very subjective, but I liked hearing what you think it is and how you view it.
I really appreciate that because I think.
And
What's
it's
that?
not, and especially when you said that it's not just the result, not just the thing, but the process is part of the art itself.
Yeah, and I think the process is art itself as well. Yeah, it is, and I really appreciate that perspective. I hear the phrase "art for art's sake," and I think that it sounds to me like a vast oversimplification that potentially a journalist wrote, thinking that they would touch the widest possible group of people without really saying anything. Because even when you're just doing an exercise, I don't think art is ever art for art's sake. I think there's Brian Kershisnik talks about it as something that feels like it's rupturing inside of you, and then the art happens when the rupture happens. You know, when the energy inside of you bursts out, that's when the art happens, and I like that perspective too. But I think art always has a rationale behind it, and sometimes that is just like the Dadaists, some of them were working on, and some of the surrealists. Sometimes it just happens because you have to make something and you have to create something. And I don't think that, so when you do your exercises or when you do your sketching, your warm-up exercises, I don't think it's ever art for art's sake. I think every time we make something or create something, it's valid because it's something that we needed to do. Whether or not anybody else will ever participate in it is completely immaterial. Sometimes you just need to make something to get those energies going. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. However, when
Yes.
I see the phrase art for art's sake, I usually hear it as opposed to art for money's sake.
Oh,
So
I see. So it's non-economy is what you're talking about.
yeah, I interpret it as like if I'm making art for art's sake, I'm making it for my own sake and not for other people necessarily.
Okay, yeah, I can totally buy into that. What I don't like, what I really detest, is when artists disrespect themselves and devalue completely their own efforts. Because everything you make is important for your development and your growth and your maturity as an artist. You know, as you get better and better, even if it's stuff that you throw away that nobody will ever see, you still, like Albert Durer talks about, you're still completing those pillars of art, and you're still communicating with something, even if it's with your past self. It's still valid. And I hope you guys remember that. And when you get commissions and stuff like that, and I've had students where people have said, well, it only took you an hour to do that, and they devalue your work. That frustrates me so much. I remember a story of Picasso was in a cafe, and a woman visiting from another country saw him and came up and said, oh, you're Picasso? And he said, yes, yes, I am. And she gave him a napkin and said, could you do something for me on this napkin? I don't care what it is. Anything from you would be wonderful. So he did. And he made a little scribble and handed it to her and said, that'll be $10,000. And she said, what? It took you like 3 seconds. And he said, yes, ma'am, but it took me my whole life to get to those 3 seconds. And that's where I want you guys to think about yourselves, because it took you your whole life to get to the point where you're spending 15 minutes on a project. so think about, or 15 minutes on an exercise. So think about that, all of you. Anyway, I really Polly, thank you for saying that. I like that. I don't really care what people's definitions of art are, as long as you're able to articulate it, or at least approach the process of articulating what you think art is. Because then we can talk about something. When you just wave your hands and say, well, art is just, making something, it's ephemeral, that doesn't give us anything to talk about. But when you're able to actually articulate on some level a couple sentences about what you think it is, then we can discuss, and we can apply rules of critical thinking and be engaged in that. And I think having that vocabulary, when you're expressing that vocabulary, also helps you to formalize your own thoughts, and helps you to think better yourselves. So anyway, does that sound good for this week? And then next week, we're going to look at what you've turned in for structure with the skin, and we'll talk about that. We'll go over the quiz, and we'll dive more thoroughly into this whole biomorphic abstraction carving kind of thing. In the meantime, your assignment is to find the crappiest clothes you can. So when you start carving, it's not going to hurt your feelings when things get a little bit dirty. All righty?
Oh, real quick. We
Yes,
had
Polly.
some wooden sticks in our kit. Is that for this assignment?
Structure with the skin, I would suggest that would be a really good place to use them. And those people that look like they were using popsicle sticks, yeah, use as much of that as you can. You can also use them for other things too, but I would say that would be a really good place to use them. So yes,
Right.
definitely. And of course, as always, you can get your own materials and apply them as well. I've actually had people do this with dried seaweed and pasta noodles, which is very interesting. Not structurally sound, doesn't really stand up to travel very well, but it does make for a very interesting looking structure with skin. All right, folks. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful week and weekend, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night, everybody.